Greg, let me start off by,
Please.
of all, thanking you for being here this early time.
No worries. Thank you for inviting me.
Early time in the morning. And where were you born, Greg?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois.
Okay. Are you the only child?
No, when my brother was born in Chicago as well, we moved from Chicago to Philadelphia. I was born right downtown in the middle of Chicago, so city boy from the beginning.
Are you the first child or the second?
First, but my mother had two other stillborn, and then unfortunately one who had passed away soon after birth. So yeah, I guess I'm the first.
And then you have your brother. So it's the two of you.
Just the two.
Well, how are mom and dad doing?
My father passed away at 10. My mother passed away 2013.
Right. And we talked a little bit before, so you did get to know your father because you were 10
Yeah,
years old.
I mean, yes. For whatever reason, I have a really strong memory from like day one. So I remember lots of strange things. And then, my father and my mother divorced. He moved to New York, but it was kind of a light divorce. I think it was more of a separation. And we would go and visit him, but that was like the last 2 or 3 years. So the time in New York when we go up, or when he would come down here, I had good memories of that.
Okay. Yeah. And your brother and you, how many years difference between
you? A year and a half.
Are you guys really close?
Yeah, but there's two things we know not to talk about, and that's politics and guns. And I won't get into it as to who's on what side. All
right. But you guys had some very heated debates.
Once or twice, but I think, you learn from them.
Right, I guess you were.
I mean, you come to respect one another in a different way. You're no longer kids. You don't settle anything by wrestling around on the floor.
That's right.
You have to understand and be open to what your brother is. Years since he's developed as an adult, he's had a different experience, and so have I. So.
Isn't that interesting? Do both of you have children?
Yes, he was married relatively young, and he has a daughter who is about 30. I was married relatively late, so I have a son who's now 15 as of a week or two ago, and my daughter who's 11.
Okay. Oh. And you've been married only once? Or?
Yes.
Okay. You said did you have
No, I realized that.
I think that would be enough.
No. Yeah, I guess that is a question that comes up. I mean.
Yeah. You always been there. I see you tiptoeing around that. Why don't we leave that alone and go to the next one? What kind of kid were you when you were growing up? Were you more academic or were you more sports-minded?
Good question. To be honest, I wasn't super into sports at the beginning, but I would say around 10 years old, I think, because I lived in Philadelphia, the hockey team did really well, so everyone was playing street hockey, so suddenly I'm playing street hockey and I was liking it. Then we had the Sixers who were doing well. I was liking basketball. Eagles are doing well, so I was liking football. Phillies are doing so. You go from nothing.
But you were actually doing the sports too.
Well,
when you said you were
when I said I was a city boy, I meant a real city. I mean, we didn't have these lovely, well-groomed
fields or anything.
We were. In the middle of Philadelphia, there's this plot of land that was, probably houses at one time that they knocked down. So it was a lumpy field. It was very long and very, not so wide. And on one side was a cemetery, and then on the side and on the far end was a street. And on the far end, you had a trolley that would come down. And if you were playing baseball, you'd stop the game, and then you'd have the pitcher. Okay, if you could hit the trolley, you get a grand slam, so you got to get it over the fence and boom, hit the trolley. But that was the city boy fun.
Okay.
It's a little different. So you learn to hit, and you learn to run the bases and not trip over the lumpy field.
Right.
And if you hit the ball into the cemetery, well, that's two strikes, I think. You had to find the ball.
Is that right? Oh, right, because you had to find the ball. That's one thing.
Yeah.
It's also kind of like bad luck.
We didn't think of it that way. I mean, we had a lot of fun in the cemetery, Halloween parties and things, you're looking around for things, playing kick the can or whatever. In the city, we played a lot of kick the can.
Okay.
And that was a big deal. And growing up in Philadelphia, especially downtown.
That's a game? Because I remember kicking. When I was growing up, we kicked the can, but we didn't make a game. What was the game?
Basically, you had two people who were the people who had to protect the can, and they would go out and you would hide, and they would see you and they say, hey, I see you, something or other, and you had to run back to the can, and you basically it's a race, and you try to beat the guy who's supposed to protect the can, and if he touches the can first, then you're caught, and you have to wait for your other friends to all be caught. But if you beat him and you kick the can, you free anyone who's sitting there who's already been caught. Stupid game, it seems, but I tell you, we went late into the night, and we were playing in Philadelphia. We lived 4 or 5 blocks from Independence Hall, Carpenter's Hall, all that stuff. So, in historical parks, they probably would kick us out now, but we were doing that, and it was fun.
What years are we talking about? What year was this?
Oh, that was in the 70s.
In the 70s, okay. Yeah. Well, I was already here.
My father and mother were, both of them did not go to college. Both of them were in the magazine industry. They met in early 60s. They got married. My father was married once before. My mother got married late because she was a so-called career woman, but she just came up through high school, and she just wanted to be an editor, so she went to New York. So they met, they married in New York, and then they moved to St. Louis, to Chicago, as I mentioned, where I was born, and then to Philadelphia. They were both in the magazine industry. They worked together at Hearst Corporation, Saturday Evening Post in Philadelphia. They used to have a massive building, literally right next to, still is there, right next to Independence Hall. And then when my father passed away, my mother, who was taking care of us for a couple of years, she had to go back to work. So she contacted the Hearst Corporation, and they said yes. I mean, it was interesting because I reading some letters from my mother to me that she left, and she explained that, especially later in their career when they were working together, the employers seemed to value my mother's contributions even more than my father's. Okay. So when she was ready to go back to work, they were like, yes, welcome back.
Was he an editor too?
No, he was on the sales side, selling advertising. Okay. So she went back to work for Good Housekeeping magazine in New York. So she was commuting from Philadelphia to New York every day, or basically every day, 5 days a week, sometimes 4 days a week. So that meant getting up early. She had to get from her house to 30th Street Station to take the train up, then from there, I think, walk down to Hearst or something. So we were shaped by that, which meant, she wasn't around, so it was just me and my brother. We had to learn to cook and all that.
The lock-key children, where you had the key to the house and you'd be there and you had to do all the stuff yourself?
Yeah, but to be honest, again, this is a different era.
Right.
We just left the door open. So
that's true.
We didn't lock the door, which is probably the stupidest thing you could do in retrospect. But
you never had any.
As far as I know, we never had any problems.
Wow, yeah. That was a different time. It was definitely. And these are the brownstone homes that are.
No. That's more New York,
okay, right.
Center City, as they call it. Where we lived was a historical area that had just gone under, became like a fishmonger area and other. I mean, it just really went down. And Kevin Bacon, the actor, his father, was actually a very big city planner in Philadelphia. And in the 50s and early 60s, he replanned how Philadelphia was going to look and feel. So these buildings that were basically, I mean, literally crumbling, he offered for next to nothing to anyone who wanted to come to the city because people had left the city. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they're bringing people back. They had to, they got the places for next to nothing, and they had to rebuild them in a certain way. At the same time, where there were places where there was no way to necessarily rebuild, he ran a walkway system around that led to like Independence Hall and everything. So we rented. So whoever, well, I know the owners, it was Quaker owners actually, that they had bought the house and they more or less did it themselves. But it was all brick buildings, row houses, brick buildings, but they're all made into a motif from like 1700s. So I think the house we lived in was like from 1740 or something like that. So that was interesting. So it was four stories and a basement. Okay. And it just went up like this and had not iron stairs like that, but these wood stairs that they put in. So we were always up and down, up and down. I mean, I just remember that. And it had lots of fireplaces because that's how they used to heat. I mean, that's how they used to heat the houses. So we learned how to make the fires and things like that when we were little kids. But that was fun. That was a different experience.
So then from there, you go into junior high, high school. would you really start to study? Where were your interests?
So I went to a public school in Philadelphia, which I really liked.
Was it really diverse? I mean, as far as ethnic-wise?
I wish I brought the picture, because if you see the picture from, actually it was started in kindergarten in '69 or something like that, and you go through the early '70s. I think I left there in '74. It was like the UN with midgets, you know.
Gotcha.
It was like
Little
all
kids,
these.
yeah, right.
You look and we should all hold up like which country we were from or something like that. Taiwan, Cambodia.
What about the teachers?
Well, the teachers are also diverse. We had a much
cool.
older teacher. We had African American teachers. I mean, and these shape you.
I understand.
Because because what they're relaying is their experience. So the first things you hear when you're learning, not just about the core curriculum, you're learning about how someone lived that and learned that core curriculum. So it was fun and different. But I'll be honest. I mean, we were in school, but you never looked at anyone like, oh, you're from Taiwan or something. It was, this is my friend.
Right. You didn't. I can relate to it in this respect. When I was in kindergarten, there was a little girl that I liked more than anyone else. Her name was Naomi. And I was then fast forward to junior high school. I see her down on the playground, and I used to walk home with her and her grandmother. I never knew what they were talking about or what they were saying. Okay. So I'd walk home, and they'd let me walk so far, because everyone walked home, and then they'd break off to wherever they had to go, and I'd keep on going. Fast forward to junior high school, I look at her, and I see her, and I tell the guy next to me, because I was a hall monitor, I said, that's little girl, I loved her when I was in kindergarten, but why didn't she ever grow? And he says to me, most Japanese don't get that tall. And it was like, I knew who Japanese were, but I never saw her.
Yeah.
As Japanese.
That's exactly.
She had the prettiest black hair, straight.
You grow up with people. You just
that's
don't. Not what you're
don't
thinking
look at that.
Yeah.
If this guy has big ears, he had big ears. He has big, no lips, or whatever it may be.
No. It's true. I mean, we.
Then we learn later.
Yes.
That we have different categories.
Okay.
For people. No, people start teaching you that through the media.
So this is interesting. So I went to this public school. I remember distinctly, you were talking about different friends. There was one African American guy, and his name was Jacob Adams, and I thought he was like, oh, you must be like related to me. We're like brothers. Yeah, we were like good friends. Yeah, we didn't really think that, but we kind of thought that there must be something. And then there was Henry Leong, and he lived in Chinatown, and he was short, but he was the fastest kid. And I'm like, man, I want to be as fast as Henry Leong. And it was kind of like when the kung fu movies were quite popular. And I mean, I just remember everyone in the school wanted to learn kung fu. A little later in the grade school, people started with nunchucks and throwing stars. Like, wait a second, that's a little too much, but this is the way it was,
That's true.
Yeah.
That is so true. But we're so influenced by the time and the era that we grew up in. So you get into high school. What did you find yourself focusing on most?
So when my mother started going back to work, the first thing was, well, what do I do with the kids? So we went and we left this public school. We went out to live with my grandparents outside of Philadelphia in the suburbs and went to a Catholic school. Okay. So suddenly I was
all boys school.
No. It was
co-ed.
It was mixed, but it was
a mixed Catholic school.
Mixed boys and girls.
Right.
But it was all white. Okay. So suddenly I'm in this school that's all white, and I was shocked, and and that's when you start to hear about other people. Okay, black people are like this, gay people are like that, Chinese people are like this. Wait a second. And I was really like, I was not happy. Not happy at all.
What grade was this? What grade did you go?
I think it was third, fourth. Half a third and half a fourth.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. So then, my mother realized we did not, we lived with my grandparents. That was fun. It was actually good to spend some time with them. And it was a suburban life, so it was more outdoor stuff, riding bikes and things like that. We couldn't really do that so much in the city. There just wasn't places to ride a bike to. So we went back to Philadelphia, but since we had started in the Catholic school, my mother then put us into a local Philadelphia Catholic school, which was, again, very diverse. It was from different parishes from around the city of Philadelphia. A long time ago when there's the population of Philadelphia was probably, almost double what it had been. There was lots of churches that had their own schools, but slowly they were closing their schools, so they were sending them. But it was a really small school. There was one class for each grade, and they had no place to play, so we would play on the roof, and the roof was just an open space, so you play, you have a tennis ball or something you can bring up and down with you. So that was good. And then from there, it was a good experience. It was a nice mix of Catholic and public, diverse.
Was this also still co-ed?
Also still co-ed.
Okay.
And then I I took a test and got into a Jesuit school, all boys Catholic high school.
Just you? Did your brother go as well?
He did,
okay.
Briefly.
All right.
That's a different story.
All right.
So anyway, I did that, and I think in my class, there were 4 people that got into if I remember correctly.
No, wait, now what grade did you change to go into that? Were you like in junior high now? Or?
So in Philly, it's 1st through 8th is elementary school.
Okay.
Thinking in Japanese.
Right.
So then from 9th through 12th, you go to high school. And that's just
gotcha.
I know it's
So
different in different parts of the
right.
country. So then when I went there, so I got in, and is my best friend going to get in or not? Because I knew his grades were always a little bit, but he got in.
Okay.
He got it. He just passed the test, and he got in. So we went in, and that was fun. And that's completely different because now it's all boys school. Again, it's very diverse. Lots of people from all over the place, including New Jersey, because New Jersey is right across the river from Philadelphia. And it was really strong in sports. It's now extremely strong in sports, especially football, which it was decent when I was there, but now it's one of the top programs in the country.
They've developed the school, I'm sure, too. Made it bigger?
Not necessarily. They
okay, it's already big. Okay.
Because the experience is really good. I mean, it's, again, all boys school, so it's a different experience, but they really focus on education and life education and, how to treat people and, be successful, but really at the same time you take care of the other people.
And again, the teachers are diverse as well?
Yes.
Okay.
They had lay teachers, as they would call them, and people from the cloth.
church.
Yeah.
Okay.
And both were very diverse. We had some women. We had a sister. It was interesting because the sister, what was her name? I can't remember. Really nice lady, but she was teaching us sex education. It was always a...
Did she wear a habit?
No. That
Okay.
was post-habit time.
Okay.
Although when I was back in the suburbs, when I went to that first Catholic school, that was, the habits were still in
But
effect.
I saw 2 nurses yesterday.
Hands.
Here,
Oh,
here
yeah?
in Richmond, wearing habits.
Yeah.
Right by Roppongi Hills.
There's a...
Because it's Sacred Heart right
Exactly,
around the corner. Yes,
exactly,
I know,
that's right.
and they're still in habits.
Well, I mean, things change, I guess.
And things don't change too.
They don't change too. Just because they're not wearing a habit doesn't mean they can whack
That's
you over
right.
the knuckles with the ruler. But
That's what happened to me. That's my father put me in the Catholic school. No, serious. I went up there, and the teacher. I didn't tell you this last time.
no, I can only
He
imagine.
puts me in the He puts me in the St. Agnes. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget you, St. Agnes. I go there, and the teacher says in the class, I must have been about 8 years old. She says, to all the kids, who made God? How to get here? Lance, I raised my hand. She says, Lance. And I said, he made himself. And she says, come up here. She said, put your hand out. Now, I had no experience of ever having anything like this. She said, put your palm up like this. And she took out a ruler and just hit me as hard as she could with it. And she said, that's ridiculous. Nobody knows who made God.
Ooh.
And I thought,
You got punished for it.
Yes.
It wasn't she just
She was
told
saying-
you.
She just wanted to get something off her chest. And I don't
Yeah.
care. That made me so bad. I came home. When I got home, I said, Dad, I'm done. You
Oh.
can't do this. Nope.
You
Put
left?
me back in the public. No, I didn't leave. I didn't. No, she would have beat me half to death. No.
Yeah.
But when I did get home, I told
Yeah.
Dad, we can't do this. Catholic school is not
Okay,
for
you
me."
left the Catholic school?
I sure did.
Okay.
Yeah. But you stayed in. It was really good for
I didn't, I left that Catholic school and I had a good experience after that in the city Catholic school.
You left the one that your grandparents had you at.
Yeah.
And then
yeah,
when
yeah.
you came
When I
back,
was
your
in
mother
the-
put you in the other school.
The one in the city,
It was
which
all
was
boys.
no, that was high school. So the one in the city was very diverse, co-ed, very small, one class per grade, and it was good. I mean, I didn't even think of it too much as a Catholic school. We had to go to church. We had to, I think, once or twice a week. You had your religious studies, if I remember, but it was more on everything else. So I didn't.
was neat.
It was good.
So you go to high school, you go through Catholic school, you start doing good in school.
Yeah.
What headed towards?
You know, I
Had
tell
you
this.
thought about it? Yeah.
Oh yeah, I told this to the kids that I met with from my graduate school, from the undergraduate part of my graduate school, who came to Japan a couple weeks ago. I always knew I wanted to do something with cars. I mean, literally, at first day, boop, pop out cars. I don't know why. Don't know why. You know, it's one of these things. It's so deep in you. You know,
That's
somebody
right.
can say, "I like to do X because of something." I don't know. It's just part of me.
So so growing up, what kind of things, if I were to come to see your home and see your area, your private stuff, what would I see around it that would indicate that you like cars?
I wanted to be a car designer. Okay. So, and I had all these, I went to these car shows and I liked a lot of pamphlets and things. For a brief time, I was making some model cars, you know, and at the Philadelphia Civic Center, they had one of the MPC or one of the manufacturers of the model car kits had a contest. So I put a couple of cars in there and I was 10 years old, so they got third place. You know, it was good. I think they were good, but they weren't that good, but good enough. You know, we were putting the engine wires with thread and things, so it was a little bit of detail.
And you had to paint it too?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
What was the car you did this to?
The one that won was a 32 Ford, which, you know, I wasn't really in. To be honest, I wanted to try something different, and I made the 32 Ford. I kind of like foreign cars a little bit more than not. And the reason for that is because living in the city, we did not have a car, so we always had to rent a car if we wanted to go somewhere. So I always rented from Hearst, which was a Ford typically. So we didn't like GM. I liked Ford a lot. Grand Torinos, and LTDs, I think is what my father was always getting, you know.
But the Thunderbird was nice too.
We got a Thunderbird once in every, wow, but they didn't have too many of those.
They sure didn't. Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to do something with cars. I was thinking, you know, car design. So, but you know, you go through high school and you're not yet thinking about your career as much as you're thinking about what you need to learn that to get to that next level to get into college. So yeah, I did that, and what else? I was. As I said, that's the time period where I got into the local sports, so therefore we're doing lots of street sports. Never an organized team, except for...
But in high school?
Yeah.
Well, street sports, what do you mean street sports? Like,
street hockey, street basketball. When we would go to the local, you know, schoolyard or something, and we would play, like I told you about the baseball, football, play. Yeah, you make up rules, and then, but the point was, you got outside, and you got outside even when there was not a lot of necessarily grass around or something, but you would, you know, make good.
So the school didn't have the facilities, or wasn't set up for that?
So the elementary school I went to, they only had the space on the roof, so we had nothing. So we had the other local Episcopalian school that had the graveyard that had one basketball hoop that never had a net, you know, stuff like that. You never know if it really went in or not, that kind of thing. But,
it depends on how you look at it.
But what happened was you had these like neighborhood teams. So you'd end up playing against, you know, the neighborhood team from 3 or 4 blocks away that they always played together. I remember we went to that public school that I originally went to, and they had a massive schoolyard parking lot. We had this one, it was going to be us that we always played street hockey with against them. And the guy who was the goalie, though, he would play with us and play with them. So we played half the game with him in our goal and half the game he was in the other goal. But it was intense. And I remember, you know, we had the boom box and we were listening to tunes as we were playing. And it was, you know, we were getting up for weeks. We're going to go play these guys. It's going to be on the Saturday. But it was just kids. It was nothing organized.
You guys had planned it yourself and everything. Somebody had to be the communicator to say, hey, we're going to play against this other team.
It's probably the goalie.
Because
he's
I don't remember. Because I'd be able to do both teams, yeah.
Yeah, but it was fun. And really, those kids were wonderful.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So no fights broke out or anything like that? I mean,
there
were verbal fights. No,
we never had any fight. There was a lot of words said, but I have to say that there was never really any fighting.
That's neat, because my era was different. My era, they came up and they started. We would fight, but it wasn't the violence you start seeing later. We handled it. We handled it without any other instruments. It was just ourselves.
Not that we didn't have fights. Right. You know, Philadelphia is a wonderful city, and I don't know really how it is now, but it had lots of its own neighborhoods, right? Polish neighborhood, Italian neighborhood. Now there's a Vietnamese neighborhood, a black neighborhood, German neighborhood, mixed neighborhood, whatever. So people are walking through each other's territory, someone would be bound to say something.
That's about it, though.
Bound to say something. And the two streeters in Philadelphia, it was a bunch of Irish kids. I'm part Irish myself, but they, but I say it's Irish because they were mostly Irish, but they were more importantly, they were two streeters. They were from 2nd Street. And when they would walk through the neighborhood to go home, words were said, and sometimes, a few of those.
You had a few of those sometimes.
I remember, too, there was these black girls that came through our neighborhood, and we were playing something, hockey or something, and they said something to one of my friends, and like, hey, and they wanted to get into a fight. They, meaning my friends and these girls. And there was a fist fight with these girls, and my friends got their butts whooped.
Because these girls came
because they never fought, probably.
Right.
But I mean, it was never serious. There was never any instruments of destruction.
Right, exactly.
Same it was words and
fisticuffs.
Fisticuffs, but not even that much. Because in the end, you're laughing with these girls or with the two streeters or whatever it was. So
that's interesting. So you go to college. From high school, you were thinking serious, okay, now I'm going to go to college. Now, what am I going to study? What happened then?
So then, like I said, my mother and father never went to college. The only person in my immediate family at that time that went to college was one of my uncles, okay? So we didn't know anything. On your mother or
father's side?
On my mother's side.
Okay.
So we didn't know anything about college. Yeah, like my mother's younger sister's kids who were slightly older than me, they had started to go to college, but we didn't see enough of them. I didn't know, and I didn't never ask them anything about college. We were all still too young. But so it was a big deal for me then first to go to college, and I didn't realize it until later. So I'm looking around at which colleges to go to. Long story short, I went to the University of Richmond, so it was down south, or just across the Mason-Dixon line. Right. I don't know. Some people would say it's not South, but it's capital of the South. It was. And it was actually 70% of the students were from the Northeast, which is, I guess, not what I was expecting. I mean, I probably read that somewhere, but it was people from, Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Massachusetts. That was interesting. But it was an isolated campus, so it was not in the middle of downtown Richmond. It was slightly outside, so everything occurred there. And it was nice. I mean, met a lot of nice people, had a good experience, but coming from the city, I felt a little isolated. But it was good and made really great friends from that time. But it was also not as diverse as I wanted it to be.
Okay, so it was mostly white.
It was mostly white.
Okay.
And with my roommate of 4 years, who was Jewish, so I got to spend a lot of time with him, and his parents are great, and I learned a lot more about the Jewish faith because I had lots of Jewish friends when I was growing up in Philadelphia. But they would always invite me to Passover or something. They would, and I just learned a lot about not the faith of Jewish people, but how they interact, which was great. I always like that, something like that, when you learn something new from someone else. But there weren't, it's not that they didn't have any African American people at my school. There were some there. A lot in the athletic programs, a lot they were extremely bright. But like we had a fraternity system, okay? And so when I joined this fraternity system, it was, it had, like I said, you're isolated. So at one point in the 60s, I think, they had built these lodges, okay? So that's where you would go. Maybe way back in the day, in the 30s, they used to be dorms, and so you lived there, but almost all of them, you couldn't do that. So I ended up at this one fraternity, and they were known they were really nice guys, but they were known as the drug fraternity, But I didn't do any of that stuff. And the people who were 1 year before me also, and they were really cool. The music they liked was good, and they were diverse-minded. So I joined them, and that was fun. And then, but then as you get in there and you go a year in or two, you're like, how can we get more people of diverse people? So I remember there was this one guy, and he was much older than us. He was like 25, but he was an ROTC, African American guy, and he came to the fraternity, and so I rushed him, meaning, you should come, you should join. So I remember it was time to pick the people who would join. You get in and you have these meetings, And then it's when you learn about your fraternity brothers.
Okay.
And I'm not going to say who.
Okay, right.
The good thing is, and I mean it, that everyone was like, yeah, we really like XXX. A couple of guys are like, you learn they're from someplace, frankly, the deep south or whatever, and stuff comes out. But he made it in. And then I was one of his big brothers. And the interesting thing was, I really liked him, and I'm so happy that he joined. But then you learn a lot about him, too. And he told me one day, he said, Greg, I don't know how to drive. I said, what? I said, I don't know how to drive. And he had to go to these ROTs, and he said, I was taking the bus and this and that, and he was living off campus. I had no idea, He was 25 years old. He was 4 or 5 years, 6 years older than me. I don't know. So I said, listen, I'll teach you how to drive. Because I had my grandfather's car there for a little while, this 79 Olds Cutlass. Okay, so it was easy to drive. Boat, little boat. So it took him out to drive, and then finally I took him to the driving school, the light where he get his license. So, and he got it, and I remember that, and he remembers that, and stuff like that sticks with you.
Right. Are you still in contact with this guy by any chance?
It was way pre-internet. I remember one time in Washington D.C. I ran into him in whatever the train station is, the Union Station. He was going somewhere with a group of friends, and I was going with my mother somewhere. And I think I took his phone number, and I think I called him once or twice. But then, unfortunately,
right.
Some people will pop up if you look, and some people, fall into the cracks.
Right. Wow.
Anyway, it was important experiences,
So going through college, what did you major in?
In the end, I majored in economics, and I, what else? Design. It wasn't a major. It was I spent a lot of the extra credits I could do in design and art. I was just interested in
the car design.
No, they didn't have car design, so they had the theory of design or architecture, or I took newspaper layout design when they're still doing everything basically pre-computer.
Right.
So you learn how to do it by hand and then transfer it into very early, floppy disk, digital era stuff. But it was good. It gave you some basics.
Gave you the basics.
Yeah.
So when did you eventually, when you got out of college, when did you get to do what you wanted to do?
So that was, I that you're going to get out of school and you're not going to be right where you need to be.
And you graduated with what? With a what? What degree?
Bachelor of Economics.
Economics.
Yes.
Okay.
So I almost immediately, I knew I wanted to go to grad school. I knew I had to go to grad school to attain what I wanted to do. Like I said, I wanted to be a car designer, so I was looking at all this.
And you still had that passion.
Oh, stuff doesn't leave me.
Okay.
Still, if I could do it, I would probably do it. But there was the Art Center for Design in Pasadena, which is the car design school, at least in North America. Royal College of Art in London. But you needed to have portfolio. I was trying to develop a portfolio, but I just couldn't get there. So I realized I'm probably not going to make it as a car designer. But I also liked cars and the concept of cars and the business of cars. So, like I said, I always wanted to be in the car business and do something international. I read a lot. I spent a lot of time with many different types of people, and my mother spent a lot of time with her job with Good Housekeeping. She was international affairs editor, so she got to go. We never traveled anywhere, frankly, as a family, because we didn't have the funds to do that. But she would go as international affairs editor and public member of the Foreign Service. So she would get to go on these trips, and her role was to work with women in other countries and then report on that for her job. So she went to more than 100 countries, 120 or something like that. But she came back and would always tell me what she liked and didn't like about whatever country she went to. And she went everywhere. So she said, Japan is really wonderful. Okay, so she had been to Japan before me. We talked about it. She knew I liked cars. She knew I liked Japanese cars at the time. At the same time, my roommate, from school, my 4-year roommate in University of Richmond, also went one semester to Osaka, Kansai Daigak.
Okay.
And so he came back, and wow, all these. So all these great experiences I was hearing. So I was starting to shape kind of what I wanted to do. So at the time, for grad school, there were the beginnings of the International Business Graduate School programs starting. One of them was Thunderbird in Arizona, but another one that really interested me was University of South Carolina for the MIBS program, MIBS, Master of International Business Studies. And the reason it interested me was if you don't know a language and it's a difficult language, you have to do it for 3 years. So typically grad school is 2 years, but this is 3 years. But not that I wanted to go to school longer, but they taught you the language and they brought you to the country and you had to work in an internship. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, wow, that's if you're going to do it, that's the way to do it, right? So I did that. I joined University of South Carolina. First thing you have is an intensive summer of language. We knew no Japanese, zero. Arigato, konnichiwa, and that was it.
No, the name of this program,
MIBS, M-I-B-S. It's
MIBS,
now
okay. They still do it?
Well, MIBS itself has been merged into the Darla Moore School of Business, which is a great business school at the University of South Carolina. My graduation year, 91, they achieved #1 overall International Business School program, U.S. News and World Report, which is great, and they continue to do that for many, many years, and still do that with Darla Moore School of Business, I think, for undergrad, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So anyway, so that got me to Japan. I had to learn the intensive language the first summer, and then we continued it on while we're doing our MBA portion in the middle of the school year, then a second intensive summer, and then based upon how you did there, I think we had, I don't remember, maybe 9 or 10 people in our class in the Japanese track of MIBS program. I mean, they had German, they had Russian, they had everything else. And you work on this, and you had to take these tests at the end, and if you were in the top 4, you would get to go to Waseda University, and then everywhere else would go to ICU to continue learning Japanese and business and all that stuff. So I was lucky enough to work hard and get into Waseda, which is great. I mean, I just, I thought
how many of the group got into Waseda? 4 of you. Of how many people total?
Like I said, it was about 9.
9 in the class.
But everyone was at a pretty good level.
In reading and writing.
Reading and writing. Oh yes, we had to do that. You had to do the kanji. You had to, we were at that point. There was actually a business Japanese set of textbooks that were developed, I want to say, by Nissan. Uh-huh. Okay, so we were using those, which is great. And then you can only do so. I think you can only do so much outside of the country. So when we landed in Japan, we were well grounded in terms of good basics, able to read and write to a certain level. But then it's you get thrown into everything, like and it really shoots up.
Right. It shoots up, yeah.
But
first of all, what you're being taught isn't necessarily what people are saying.
Yeah, I mean, you realize that the business Japanese isn't going to work on the street. No. Or vice versa. Some things you don't want to say from the street if you're talking to your boss.
Did you have any Asian friends, any Japanese friends?
Oh, yeah. Like I said, going back to that public school in Philadelphia.
They spoke Japanese, I mean, not the American Japanese.
At home they did, but I mean, you never think of it. My father had a really close Japanese friend, Mr. Tanaka. Mm-hmm. And the reason I remember him, he was a super cool guy in Philadelphia. I didn't know so much about him, but he had a Porsche 356.
You remember?
Okay. Well, like I said, I know cars. I can look over and just look at the headlights. I know where they are. It's just a strange thing. So he had this Porsche 356, and wow, that is so cool. But he was cool cat, Just didn't say much. Just look at you and that's all he needed to do. But he and my dad were very close friends, and he had a family. But what I remember was his wife and daughter or kids were kidnapped, and he never saw them again.
Don't say that.
Oh yeah. So I remember that distinctly.
Whoa. Really?
Yeah. With the internet and everything now, we're all very aware of these things happening all the time, but they happen.
Wife and his child were both kidnapped.
Yes. Never saw them again.
In Philly.
Yeah. I'd have to look deep and far to find that out.
Were you really young when that happened?
Oh yeah, I mean, my father was still alive, so it was before I was 10.
Before you 10. Wow.
So anyway, that started it, and then in South Carolina there was actually many Japanese students coming to learn English or coming to the the undergrad school. I'm trying to remember. I don't think we had any Japanese students in the grad school at that time, but there were in previous years.
But I'm
and
just
things.
wondering, did you have any that you no that were your friends that you
Oh yeah,
actually
yeah.
talked with on a regular basis?
So we had these. So these, we quickly got in touch with the Japanese community in the University of South Carolina.
Okay, right. Once you got,
and they became our speaking partners. They
Gotcha.
became our friends, our
Okay.
drinking buddies, and we still meet today in Japan because many of them have moved back here. In fact, one of them lives right next door to the TAC.
That must be.
This is. I mean, what I learned is
he a member? Is he a member?
he's not, and I'm like thinking, why aren't you?
Remember, he speaks
should-
English fluently.
Oh
right?
yeah.
Of
And
course.
he's what is he? He's a CEO for a Swiss metals company or something. Anyway.
Wow. Okay, so you come over here, you go to Waseda. You're going to be there for a year.
Yeah, it was a year in Waseda,
Okay.
and then we had to go to an internship. So, as I said, my goal was cars and international. Unfortunately, my school did not have an internship or a relationship with a company that was in the motor industry. So they had lots of great internships in other manufacturing industries, good relationships with certain US or European companies here, and a lot of relationships with finance-related companies, specifically banks. So they said, well, Greg, we don't have the automotive. What else would you like to do? And that's tough. I mean, there's number one, and everything else is kind of down here. I like music. So they said, okay, you will be the one to go to Sony. And everyone else, wow, you're the one who gets to go to Sony, blah, blah, blah. Or, at least I think they thought that. But I was intent. I was going to get on the ground, and I started looking around and talking to people, alumni. There was one alumnus in particular who worked for a supplier, so he knew all of these people. So he started to introduce me to Toyota, Honda, and Nissan. So you go and you explain, this is the program you're in, and it's 1990, I guess, at the time. So it's still the end of the bubble. There's still, all these companies are doing very, very well. All of them were like, yeah, we'd be interested. So then it was a matter of, well, where? Because I was outside of Tokyo at the time, going to school, commuting in, and I'm like, well, I kind of want to stay in Tokyo. Couldn't see, Nagoya or Tochigi or something like that as being where I needed to be. So I and Nissan, I liked Nissan a lot at the time. So they accepted the internship, and I went there. I told my teacher, my sensei, Sakakibara sensei, I said, well, I hate to tell you this, but I'm going to go to Nissan to do my internship. The tension, because Sony was prized internship and a good relationship. And I'm like, well, and I had already checked around, and there was another friend of mine who was interested to go there. And so he went there, and actually, he did very well afterwards. Maybe I should have gone and done my Sony internship, but I got to do motors, and then we had a relationship now with the school and Nissan. So for years after that, there were interns, and that was also interesting. And so and Nissan wanted to do something.
So what happened after Nissan? What'd you do?
So then you have to go back to University of South Carolina. We had one semester of final classes. I think we had no Japanese at the time, just focused on papers and things for the MBA side of things. We did that, and Nissan offered me a job in Japan. Toyota offered me a job in Detroit. I did not want to go to Detroit, so I went to Nissan. And then I came back to the same place, which was the technical center, which is in Atsugi. So it's not even in Tokyo proper, right. But it was great because you're a bit away from the gaijin ghetto, so to speak. So I wasn't using English that much, and I lived in a small town, Honatsugi at first, and Isehara, and I really enjoyed that. That experience, which was, other friends of mine luckily got to come back and either as an expat or whatever here in downtown Tokyo. So it was nice to come in town and crash at their place when you go out to Roppongi or whatever it is on certain weekends. Right. But on the other hand, you got deeper into the Japanese language and culture, maybe being outside of.
That's for sure. That's for sure. So how long did that last?
I was at Nissan until the very end of 1995, and then I moved to Ford of Japan in Yokohama. I was working for the parts side. I was told you would develop half of the time would be working with Japanese companies in Japan, and half of it was to work on Southeast Asia. In the end, I was 100% focused on Southeast Asia, basically strategy, business development, and I was going back and forth to all of these interesting countries, and that was great. I mean, you get to be based here. And then at one point, the boss said, "Well, Greg, I like your strategy, blah blah blah. We want you to move to Singapore." And at the same time, I remember I was distinctly talking to, someone had called me from Deutsche Bank, and a really nice guy who's head of equities. And he really wanted to recruit me to go over and work with them because, Japanese speaking person who understood the motor industry. There was a lot going on with M&A, like with Daimler and Chrysler and all, so I was just being pursued. But then the boss was like, "Okay, what about Singapore?" And I kind of went back and forth, and I decided to move to Singapore with Ford, and it was myself, still a single guy, and then I took a Japanese guy working for Ford of Japan to do marketing with me as we went, and the intent was to build up the parts business because Ford Parts was going to eventually become what is now Visteon. So we had to diversify away from Ford, but also still keep the Ford business. So I was there, and I was talking to Toyota, Nissan, Proton, which is a Malaysia national car, Perodua, and others. It was really interesting. But I was also doing a lot of work for Ford and for Mazda, which were tied up at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ford bought into Volvo. So I was doing probably 50% of my work for the Ford family, and I started a plant in Philippines that was doing suspensions.
Are you married at this time
No,
now?
no, not yet.
You're still single?
Yeah,
Okay.
flying around.
So you went to the Philippines?
I was based in Singapore, but I was flying out of. I mean, there wasn't any business really in Singapore. It was just Ford already had a two-man show there, so I just joined them, and because they had the office space. So the Philippines project was to support mainly Ford and Mazda, who were developing pickup trucks and other things in the region, ASEAN, the Southeast Asian nations. They had trade agreements that if you build products and parts inside, the price would be really low. So this was the strategy. Let's sell into Ford and Mazda. And the key was the fuel pump, because no one else was localizing a fuel pump. So the belief was that we would have a good heads up on some of the competition. So I did that. I realized that parts, really though, that's not why I did this. I'm a car guy, I'm not a parts guy. So, and also, to be very honest, Singapore is a lovely country, but it was I had island fever,
Oh, it's interesting, right? Because it is just right there.
And
then you have the outside, right?
It's like Disneyland for adults, very sculpted and clean, and no mosquitoes, and good food, and I like the city life of Tokyo, which is very diverse. Anyway, so I came back to Japan, and I was working for a Nissan company doing, like I said, I always liked the design side, and these guys had contacted me beforehand, and it was to do research, to support research that was done for Nissan, but also to support research that was done we worked on Ford, General Motors, Suzuki, Audi, and then some non-car businesses. I remember distinctly working for a certain high-end cosmetic brand because they wanted to understand why Japanese had this 10 or 12-step process for applying makeup versus US, which is like 2, and Korea at the time was like 4. But this is money-making.
I didn't know that.
No, I didn't know either until that time.
Really?
So you learn a little something.
So when the Japanese put on makeup, they really put it on. They put
at
on
the
the
time.
coats.
Now I don't, post-COVID, who knows? But I still think it's
I know they do the eyes now because post-COVID they had their eyes done.
No, but you really learn. Again, it's the business end of things and the culture end of things with this. And then I joined Daimler Chrysler, who wanted someone in advanced product planning at Mitsubishi. They owned 34% of Mitsubishi, so I went there, and that was really, really interesting because you get to apply everything that I had learned about the business in Japan and culture and language, and my desire to be in, new car development concepts, and it was a really interesting time. I
So
really liked
closer.
the
You're
people
getting
there.
closer now.
Well, yeah, and
Which
there
one,
was Germans, Americans, Japanese, and others working there.
Mhm.
Of course, there was always, it was interesting for me to watch I wouldn't call it just how the relationship was developing between the Germans and some Americans who were there and the Japanese. It was a little bit of tension, but Nissan had already started their partnership with Renault, and so there was some precedent.
That was Carlos Ghosn's time?
Yeah, so it was early.
Right.
And we worked on some interesting things, and frankly, some of those people from Mitsubishi are very, very close friends.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then Mitsubishi and Daimler divorced. And while I was at Mitsubishi, I was working on, of course, advanced product planning, but I was the deputy Mitsubishi strategy, Daimler level strategy representative. So my boss, who is German, who came from Mercedes, was in charge of marketing, which includes product planning. That's German way of doing, which is great. And he was the representative to it was a group. It was really interesting. There was the board at Daimler, and they would meet, I can't remember, once a month maybe, and they would review all of these projects and things. But before everything went to the board, they had to be reviewed by this group that was in each of the Daimler companies. Is it thorough enough? Does it include the information you need? Is it relevant? Should we even present it to them or not? And that was, wow, that was great because you got the diversity of what you saw, what was coming across, and the way of thinking, and also kind of honed my strategic thinking a bit in terms of presentations.
How often would they do this?
Once a month. Once a month was the board meeting, so I can't remember. It was a week or so before that. We would have a deputy meeting, or let's call it the strategic support group meeting, and we would discuss what we should do or not do, and how to improve a paper. And then the other thing was, out of the board, if they decided to do a project, they would come back and would ask if it involved your company in the Daimler portfolio, you would be a representative then. So even though I was working for Mitsubishi, I was working on, for example, there was a cross-platform team to look at how to build a joint full-size SUV between Daimler, Chrysler, and Mitsubishi. So Mitsubishi had the Pajero, Chrysler had the Grand Cherokee, and there was the M-Class that was at the time at Mercedes. So that was super interesting, and you're working with your colleagues from all of these companies, and their thought processes and the branding and how to keep certain key things, and that was there. So
what was your job then, though?
So my job was at advanced product planning. So I was there to look outside of product planning, was to look at some other concepts. I worked on a different proposal for the Mitsubishi Evolution.
Wait. So let me just try to put it in layman's terms. So you would get the product, you'd see what they'd already developed. Okay, how'd it go?
No problem. So the
advanced
product planning was to a lot of special projects, or to look at something outside of the approved cars or concepts to develop. So you had certain cars that you make this, you have a replacement coming. It has a replacement coming, so you have your lineup. But then there's also advanced product planning, is to take a look at things outside. What could be a new area to cover, a new type of vehicle to make that we don't have. Okay.
So that's how the SUV came into
life.
So because there was no such thing.
Well, the SUV that was part of that strategic board that would look at how do I put it, how to build something between three companies. In that case, Daimler, Chrysler, and Mitsubishi. But my regular job was working on things, new concepts, or taking a look at some possibilities. So, example was SUVs at the time. This was 2003, 2004. Were obviously doing very well. But then the next thing was compact SUVs or
Right. I remember
mid-size
that,
SUVs.
right, right.
So they had, Mitsubishi had some in the past, but it was out of the portfolio. There's nothing there, and they were looking for something to make money, obviously. And I was first asked, interestingly enough, the chairman of Daimler had come to the Tokyo Motor Show. He had seen a certain concept that Mitsubishi had put forward. That's cool. Can we make it? He just asked that question. So that came back to my boss, who then said, Greg, could you take a look at this? So it started, that way. I mean, can you make it? I mean, frankly speaking, that concept was a small, kind of sporty hatchback car, but really small, subcompact. And it didn't really have a big following, meaning that the volume numbers throughout the world were relatively small. The profit was low, but it kind of evolved a little bit. I said, well, why don't we use that for the Mitsubishi Evo, and a slightly bigger platform, but the one that they were planning had just grown in size over the years. And so, we had part of the mythology is we challenged for the championship of the WRC, World Rally Championship. Okay, so we had won it a few years. But
And that's what? How many days is that rally?
well, it's different races throughout the world.
Yeah, throughout the world.
And it was a big thing, particularly Japanese cars like Subaru
And didn't
Mitsubishi.
they stop that now? It's stopped now. Because I remember they used to have that quite often.
Yeah.
And these guys, they have two-man team, and they go throughout the night, and they come back with these.
It's super fun, and it's everywhere.
Everywhere.
It's
yes.
everywhere. I mean, especially in
Right.
Europe, it's very big. Even in Nordic countries, so it's in snow and stuff.
I remember hearing something. They stopped it or something.
To be honest, I've been
haven't
paying more attention to F1
Okay.
since then, as you know, with Ferrari and Aston.
Right.
But the point is that, so we looked at this. The car was growing, so we were probably not going to be in a position to win any races. Okay, so what if we did a shorter wheelbase version of this core platform that we had for multiple vehicles in Mitsubishi and Chrysler, and made that a smaller wheelbase base for this car, which could have a normal version and an Evo version. And then that itself wasn't even enough for a good business plan. So I thought, why don't we use the same platform and do a small SUV? And there were not a lot of small SUVs out yet in the world. And when you added that to it, now suddenly Europe was interested in it, US had some interest in it, for sure Japan was interested in it, Southeast Asia was interested in it, maybe China. Boom, 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 boom. The business case was starting to look really good. And you get this small car off of it. Long story short, Mitsubishi and Daimler divorced in 2004. So at the very end, as they were looking through, and I say they, meaning, listen, all of the Germans, Americans, and Japanese, when that happened, I mean, it's a long story. Someone will write a book, but everyone wanted success for the company, for Mitsubishi. So everyone got together. Well, what could we do out of this list of, I think it was like 38 or 30-something cars that were potential projects? What should we keep? There's like almost no money left, but we need to have something. And they kept the small SUV, okay?
Which one was it?
The one that I had proposed.
Okay.
They did not change the Evo. The Evo that came out was, because it was already deep in development and things. But they kept the small SUV, and they made it, and it became in Japan the RVR. A long time ago there was an RVR. They stopped. There was nothing. Then this came back as a small compact SUV. It was sold in the U.S. as Outlander Sport. It was sold in Europe as the ASX, if I remember correctly. But and it did very well.
What was it here?
RVR.
RVR. That's why I remember seeing some of those. Yeah.
Yeah, and they still
RVR.
use the platform. It's now morphed a bit. It's called the Eclipse Cross or something like that.
Okay.
But anyway, that was fun. And then, so then Daimler said, Greg, next steps, you have two choices. One is to stay in Japan and work at Mitsubishi Fuso, which is the big truck company that they had purchased 89%, I think it was, after the fallout with Mitsubishi companies, purchased or received, I should say. And then, or we have a new project in China that was to start up the Dodge brand and Chrysler brand and revive the Jeep production plant. The first foreign production car plant that was in China was the AMC Jeep plant, and it was started up, but then they just never ever made anything new. So they're making, mid '80s Jeep Cherokees there. But you're allowed 2 partners in China, so we had one with AMC, with the Jeep plant, Beijing Jeep plant. So we needed to think of, my role was help with product planning. So what products should we do for them, and sign contracts, and then let's find a partner to do Chrysler and Dodge products like minivan and other things. That was really, really exciting, really crazy, amazing, wild, scary sometimes experiences. I got to work with one of the guys that was on that strategy board for the Chrysler side that I was on, that would reviewed everything. So that was good, and a super smart guy. He's currently probably the #1 foreign automotive person in China. He left Chrysler in 2009 or 10 or something like that, but he went on to decide, he decided, I'm going to stay in China, learn Chinese, and he started his own consulting company, and he's on CNBC and CNN, and we still talk and frankly do some business, but I have lots of respect for him.
You met him in the car business, okay.
Yeah, but anyway, the team was there in China, and we had to run around and find who could be partners, and my job within that was to, what is the car that we would build there, what is the spec, what is the cost, what is the partner's input. So I would always meet with the product group from XYZ companies to get there. And then finally, in the end, we would put the product side together, the sales side, the marketing side, whatever, and that would form a contract that we would sign with Beijing Jeep, or with, in the end, it was Southeast Motors in Fujian province. So that was great.
You stayed there? You stayed in China all this time?
Yeah, I was part of the small team. It was interesting because I left Tokyo when I was at Mitsubishi, and I was told, yeah, you need to go to Detroit while we start this team up and just get to know everyone, and we do the business plan. You'll be there 3 months. Okay, so I was in temporary housing, and then it was at the time that I was about to get married, so my wife-to-be had come. And long story short, I was there a year. And frankly, I don't know. Detroit was not my.
Okay, I got you, yeah.
It was interesting. As always, any experience is important, but it was not my favorite place. I mean, I was really looking forward to go to Beijing at the time. Right. So anyway, during that time, they were putting together the rest of the team. I can't remember. It's probably about 10 people. So it was a Skunk Works group inside of Chrysler to do this. And I stayed with 1 or 2 other people at first in Detroit, basically because the other team was going over there to kick things up. But I was there to work on the strategy side and help to show the CEO of Chrysler what's happening with the China project. So I would be physically there while the team would be in China, and we would have video meetings or conference calls, I guess at the time, with the CEO, and I would be there and take him through physically the presentations we made and help to explain why we wanted to do something. And that was fun. I mean, still a relatively young guy, but
you had a lot of calls and a lot of time to do that. I mean,
it was you devote a lot of time to the job.
You had to.
Yeah, especially because the time in China is like it is here.
So you were up at night talking to these guys.
Well,
going
when I was in
all
the
States
States,
and everything.
the CEO is not going to be up at night. The CEO is not going to be up at night.
No, you were up at night. I said
I was up at night talking to those guys.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
But then when I actually physically moved to China, obviously, you're working, at least meeting wise, on Detroit time. Lots of meetings, 1 a.m., whatever.
So it was harder while you were in China than it was while you were in Detroit?
It was different. I wouldn't say it's harder or whatever. Like I said, I was happy to be in Beijing because you're on the ground. You're really understanding car industry in China, which is very different than Japan. And I was, when I made the choice,
just real quickly, in what way? Just 1 or 2 different things that are
China is and probably still was and probably still is the wild, wild east.
Okay.
I mean, anything goes. So
I've done business in China, so I know.
Yeah, and I mean, the unexpected really happens. Just crazy things. But my point is that it was a great experience. I met really, really lovely friends from China that I'm still in contact with. Again, very different than Japan, very different than Southeast Asia, which I'd worked at before, and very exciting. I mean, there was lots of activity, there still is lots of activity. So it's amazing. And right now in China, what's coming out in terms of concepts and things reminds me of Japan in the 80s, 90s. We've kind of unfortunately lost the life here.
Yeah, it appears it has, but I don't think it has.
I guess the important thing was, and I'll try to keep it short, is that I was in Taiwan when I was working with Chrysler for China, and I get a call from an ex-colleague from Mitsubishi, and he had gone to Ferrari in the US. And he calls me and he says, "Greg, hey, how you doing? Hey, what's happening? I haven't spoken to him in a while. Hey, I'm at Ferrari in the US. The guy who's in Ferrari in the US is about to move to Ferrari Asia Pacific in Shanghai, and they're looking for a guy who knows Japan." Okay, and at the time, Chrysler had its bankruptcy and was about to be purchased by a hedge fund. Lots of unknowns going on, even what's going to happen with the China team and the China business. It wasn't quite there yet, but you could foresee some of the stuff. But on the other hand, I wasn't necessarily convinced on Ferrari, because here's a really small company. Like I said, I love cars. Making a $300,000, $400,000 sports car is not that difficult. Making a $10,000, $20,000 car that has all these things, that's a challenge. So that's what I was doing. So I wasn't convinced immediately. But, more calls, going back to the US for a vacation. I met with a guy who was going to go over then to Shanghai, and I was really impressed. He explained what it is that he needed to do. Japan had been a market that for 40 years was strong, but the rights for the importation were owned by a Japanese company. Frankly, it's a Hong Kong Japanese company, was. So we don't know what to do. We want to establish our own company. And plus, we have the rest of Asia Pacific. So I joined, long story short, I joined Ferrari in Shanghai, which was the Asia Pacific office, as the market strategy person. But 70% of what I needed to do was, what do we do for Japan? How do we take it over? And how do we make it work? So that was a great project. I mean, literally, I was based in Shanghai. So I moved from Beijing to Shanghai, which was also interesting. I liked Shanghai a bit better than Beijing. And was flying often twice or three times a month from Shanghai to Tokyo in order to meet with the owner of the importation rights, but also to, how do we set the company up? What's the plan? What's the strategy post setup? Blah, blah, blah. Finally, we, in 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, I want to say, with lots of iterations, working with the president of Ferrari, because he was involved. He was on the board of Ferrari Asia Pacific. We all finally agreed on what it's going to be. And then that was in...
But how did you get the export rights away from... They still have the export rights to the people that had it before you came in.
We negotiated them away.
Away.
Not away. We negotiated the turnover. They still are one of the
still
retailers of the
retailers
cars.
now.
Yeah.
No longer the importers.
No longer the importer.
Okay.
And I think, at that time, Ferrari is probably one of the last, if not the last, car company that took it over. So, it was one of these things where it wasn't unexpected in the end from the importer at the time. It was more a matter, frankly, of, okay, then knowing that, what are we going to do going forward?
Right.
And that was sometimes tough. But I think one of the things that I brought, hopefully there's lots of things I brought to this, but one of the key things I brought to the settlement, negotiation, whatever you want to say, is, I was intent on making sure that Ferrari understood that the importer, who is also the major retailer, should stay on as the retailer. Yes, there was 40 years of all sorts of relationships, let's say, but there's no reason to take that away from them. They are, or were, let's say at the time, surely one of the best dealer partners to have in the world, if not Japan.
Especially for luxury cars.
Especially for luxury cars. And it's important that you have trust and sincerity when you work anywhere, and particularly in Japan. I mean, there's no need for telling a fib or a lie.
That's true.
It's better to say exactly what it is, or say, this is what we're thinking, give me your input, and then rework it, all under the understanding that it has to work out.
Did you guys have a big ceremony or something? Because you brought Ferrari to Japan.
Well, Ferrari, there was a press conference,
right?
Frankly, and so in the end, the previous importer, and Ferrari got together, and we had a joint press conference. We announced what was going to happen, and then after that, we had to go together to rehomologate cars, go to the government to set this up, and there had never been that before. Everyone had a bad separation. There was Mitsubishi and Porsche.
Yes.
Not to go into that, but
right.
it never ended on hey, we're going to have a nice
and still
transition.
Still work together, right.
And still work together.
Right.
So in the end, we did that. So I remember we went to the.
Were you the president of Ferrari? Did they make you what was your position? What were
so
you
in I'll come to that in a second.
Okay.
But in the end, we went to the government agency to redo or rehomologate the cars under Ferrari Japan's name. But we went with the previous importer. And they were like, wait, why is he here? We've never had this happen. We need to double check to make sure everything's okay.
This is the Japanese side saying
this is the government,
right.
because we're going in with the former importer, and it just wasn't, we're buddy at that time. Or
seriously, what's going on here? Wait just a minute.
But anyway, so I'd done all of this to help to put the strategy into place, and worked a lot with my colleagues, obviously in Ferrari, worked a lot with the importer at the time, and then there was a matter of, okay, well, who's going to go do it? Because at that point, they'd actually had the joint press conference to announce things. It was, okay, we will have Ferrari Japan set up in July of 2008. Meanwhile, in March of 2008, we formally had the legal company established. And so the clock is ticking. Okay, there's a piece of paper, but we needed a company. We needed people. So it was a matter of, okay, well, who's going to go and do that? I was actually I'm still a new guy at Ferrari. I did not think that it was going to be me, frankly. I thought, okay, my role was to create the strategy, set everything in motion, and maybe someone else would go do that. But then I was being told, well, maybe it's going to be you and this and that. Long story short, my wife, Japanese wife, we lived in Shanghai, was pregnant, and she was due to give birth in May of 2008.
This is your first child?
First child. So I told my boss, I said, look, I don't know, if you'd like me to go and do this and set it up, I'm happy to do it, because he was kind of saying that. I just need to know relatively quickly, because I will not travel if my wife is in Shanghai, I will not travel from Shanghai from 2 weeks before that and 2 weeks after that. You need to know that. But that's also the time they needed to set up the company, okay, May of 2008. So in the end, he said, yes, okay, you go and do it. So literally, I left my wife for the time being, pregnant in Shanghai, a couple of bags. Gosh, I can't even remember where I stayed temporarily. And then I remember Jetra would offer a free office for a few months to set up a startup company. We were a startup company, so I signed up for that, which is great. They gave you a desk, a secretary, and then we used that for meetings. And I literally had to hire like 20 people in 2 months. So we did all that. Meanwhile, my wife came over and joined me in Japan.
What was your position, though?
It was essentially head of Ferrari Japan.
Okay, so you were the president. Gotcha.
So then we hired. I had all these interviews, so you had to meet people quick.
By yourself?
Well, by myself, I had to filter who would then go on to meet with the guy who's head of Asia Pacific, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the pace we were moving at was unbelievable. But that's Ferrari, that's the high-end luxury performance business. Same with Aston Martin, right? So which
you're the president of now.
Yeah.
Right.
So the point is, I guess I like to move fast. I don't know. I like to beat myself to death with lots of projects. we got all these people ready. They joined everyone was in by June 1st of 2008. We had to take the business over July 1st of 2008. So we got everyone doing all this training. We're, blah, 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 blah. And then it all went okay. I mean, there were little hiccups here and there, but July 1st, we transferred and took over the business and we started it up. And, we were based in Arc Hills and temporary offices, Regis. And then we found an office in Roppongi Hills. We moved there right in the middle of the Lehman shock, the global Great Recession. That was crazy. And we also launched the Ferrari California, which was a brand new category for them. There was a lot of, everyone's anxious to see how it was going to do. In the end, it did very well. So long story short, so I was there at that time. So I ran Ferrari Japan for a couple of years. We built it up. We had a strategy how to get to TBD within 10 years, TBD volume, blah, blah, blah. They actually achieved that and they kept going. So 10-year plan. So that was through 2018 and they're still moving on. And I'm really proud of that with those guys.
How long did you stay with them?
Well,
How many years?
So I left in spring of 2010 to go back to the States because my mother, who I explained, she was very independent. She was always very supportive of us going and doing our thing. But now she's in her 80s, and I could sense something when I was talking to her. But one day she said to me, first time, I might need a little help. And my mother, who never says that, when she says that, I'm like the antennas just went off. And I'm like, wow, I've been in Asia, what is it now, 20 years or something like that. I need to get back. I mean, it just hit me like a brick. So I returned to the U.S.
Taking your wife with you?
I took my wife and my newborn son because he was born in Japan just after we started, or just before we started Ferrari Japan. And we went back. Long story short, I moved to L.A. because my goal was I needed a place to bring my mother, then hopefully to have a nice transition because she was still living in Philly and it was cold and all that stuff. And I didn't know anything about LA, but there was car business there, so I went to work again for Mitsubishi Motors there. Long story short, my mom was a bit stubborn. She was not going to leave Philadelphia. I mean, that's, older people are just want to hold on to their base, and they're a little bit of a, just anxiousness about moving to a new place, and probably even with moving with us, or trying to figure out that. Long story short, though, I then moved to Ferrari in the U.S. after that, get a little closer. They were based in New Jersey, so very close to Philadelphia. She passed away in 2013, so I roughly had 3 years together to support her. Was there when she passed away with my brother. Really one of the points in life where you learn so much when you're with a parent, and the last 2 weeks it was tough because she had lots of medical issues that just kind of came on all of a sudden. Physically was there in the hospital all the time, and then she passes away when you're there. So you reassess, or maybe I should say, certain other lights go on in life, and then your priorities are sharpened again. And anyway, with career-wise, my wife, after being in New Jersey, freezing cold New Jersey, after my mother had passed away, she really wanted to get back to LA. She was not so much a fan of the cold, and I had been called by a company called Faraday Future, which is Chinese Apple Car-like EV startup company, and it was amazing experience. Won't spend too much time with that because I was there.
How long were you with them?
I was there a year, and frankly, I also joined with my previous boss from Ferrari, and it was a completely different experience. I mean, really just learned a lot about Chinese startup management style. In the end, we all, meaning the executive team, there were 8 of us or something, chose to leave the end of 2016 because of, let's just say, things we didn't agree with as a team that maybe could come back and bite us. We left. And then with that person. We did a lot of consulting then with global luxury companies, primarily in the EV space. And that was, again, a brand new experience, a lot of fun because we work with, I can't mention them all, a lot of people that are out there that are looking what to do with EV. Either they were a startup or they were an existing company, needed some help, how to refine the brand, how to change the brand to it, even from a product standpoint, what to do, blah, blah, blah. And then in 2020, Maserati had reached out to me and said, look, we know you had been in Japan, and ran Ferrari Japan and know Japan, and we're also about to institute our EV program. So would you like to come and run Maserati in Japan? And at the time, my mother had passed away. Then it's my wife, and her parents are still very Genki here in Japan. My 2 kids now are at an age where, okay, maybe it's time to go to Japan, see the other side of the culture, spend some time with their grandparents and that side of the family, blah, blah, blah. So we made the decision, came back in November of 2020. Actually, it took 6 months because of the COVID, waiting for the visa to come down. We came back, and that was interesting. At Maserati, did a lot of work on the network side in particular. That was really interesting. And then I moved to Aston Martin last summer.
As president.
Yeah, and that was to work on, there's an awful lot of ex-Ferrari people who are now at Aston, and the goal for them is, they're a 110-year-old company, and we want to be truly at the pinnacle of ultra luxury. And we have in our sights Big Red. That's where we want to compete with them. Clearly, we want to be firmly in F1. We're a car company that has a vision of being the most desirable British ultra luxury addictive performance car company in the world. So we're very clear on what that strategy then needs to be, both globally, locally, product-wise, branding, marketing. It's refine, bring on a good team, and that's kind of what we're doing now.
Greg, listen, you just had me like, it's fantastic.
No, it's
no.
Fun to
It's
talk
been
about.
a long time too, because I loved everything you were talking about and what you got into. I'd like to ask one last question before we leave. If you were to go back into time to everything you've done, where you are today, and meet the younger Greg to give him advice, how old would Greg be, and what advice would you give him?
I would probably drop back to age 9, so a year before my father passed away, to just say, take advantage of more time with your father. It's important. Just knowing that. And what else? Other than that, I'll be honest. I would not change anything. You gotta deal with life the way it comes to you, and to be honest, half of the fun is the unexpected. Some of it can punch you in the face, but some of it can be really eye-opening. And coming to Japan, meet your wife, you then have your kids. Age 10, I had no idea I was going to do that. So in that sense, you don't want to change it.
Greg, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine.
I want to thank all of you for watching this podcast. Make sure you press like and subscribe. And remember, it's all online, so continue to reach for the stars, because you're too blessed to be stressed.